Dr. Richard Prum is the William Robertson Co-Professor of Ornithology and Evolutionary Biology at Yale University. At Yale, he is the head curator of the vertebrate zoology, zoology, okay, at the Peabody Museum of Natural History. He served as the chair of the biology department at Yale from 2008 to 2011. He's also a MacArthur Fellow from 2010 to 2014. He's also been a Guggenheim Fellow and a Fulbright Scholar. He's conducted fieldwork in Madagascar and China and written widely on the evolution of feathers, mate choice, sexual conflict, aesthetic evolution, and the theropod dinosaur origin of birds. His book, The Evolution of Beauty, How Darwin's Forgotten Theory of Mate Choice Shapes the Animal World and Us, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize and was heralded as one of the 10 best books of 2017 by the New York Times. The Times has also described Dr. Prum as, quote, an obsessive birder, noting that he has personally seen over a third of the world's 10,000 known bird species. And this article is older than I'm quoting from, so the number might be higher now. Dr. Prum's newest book that he's here to talk about with us today is titled Performance All the Way Down. According to the University of Chicago Press, published the book. In it, Prum brings feminist thought into conversation with biology, arguing that the sexual binary is not essential to human genes, chromosomes, or embryos. Rejecting the notion of an intractable divide between the humanities and the sciences, Prum proves that the contributions of queer and feminist theorists can help scientists understand the human body in new ways, yielding key insights into genetics, developmental biology, and physiology. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Rick Prum to the stage.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed my visit. I want to thank Kathleen Casey and Sarah Cochran for support here and for arranging the trip. It's really great to see the Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program advancing, and that's why I'm excited to be here. I definitely want to underline that the opinions I'm expressing today are mine, but I'm here because I'm hoping that they'll be yours too someday, maybe someday soon. That is, if there's going to be change in how science works, how we think about the world, that happens one recruitment event at a time. That's you. And one retirement event at a time, that will be sometime sooner than you. And so I'm hoping to change the climate, the conversation, and that's why I'm here and be here to share. So the book could be described as a queer account of the relationship between the genome and the body, as a critique of the genomic blueprint idea, or the idea of genes as strict causes of the body. Also, we could describe it as a material philosophy of sexual difference, or material philosophy of genitalia, if you will. And finally, the proposal to create an explicitly queer space in the core of evolutionary biology. Now, I can't lay out and support all of those arguments today, but I want to give you both an understanding of how I got here, how you might think about these ideas, and then hopefully recruit you all to read the book. But the first thing I want to do is introduce you a little bit to me. How does a pale male Yale ornithologist with no lived experience as a sexual minority come to decide that queer theory is not only interesting, but makes a substantial contribution to our understanding, our scientific understanding of the body, right? And interesting is, that's a complicated story. However, it starts because really I started as a bird watcher, right? At the age of 10, never considered doing anything else. So now I'm 50 years into bird watching and 40 years into the academic study of birds. And, you know, working in that area over all this time, you get very comfortable and you earn and you start to enjoy the freedom of being able to go wherever you want to go intellectually. Now, that has included all sorts of comments like Kathleen mentioned, bird feathers, bird phylogeny, bird behavior, colors like the physics of that blue and the chemistry of that purple, lots of global travel. But and over time, I've started to realize that I've begun to study ornithology as if it was avian area study. And what I mean by that is that whatever, like women, gender, and sexuality studies, that means bringing whatever tools are necessary to the question at hand. And that's so for birds, that has meant optical physics and organic chemistry and game theory and genetics, and then ultimately aesthetic philosophy, and now queer theory. Right? And so I've gotten very comfortable working in this interdisciplinary frame, or what I would actually describe as undisciplined, right? And almost addicted to this notion about, you know, this is exciting because I really don't know anything about that, right? But the other thing is to realize that there's an opportunity to continue to challenge yourself and to grow, you know, 50 years into your interest in this area. So what really triggered this off was work that we had done, rather challenging work we did on duck sex. Now I understand there are a lot of ducks here on campus. And so by May, most of you will probably have observed some of this, but duck sex can be characterized by a social and sexual violence, right? And it was really the evolved response to this that we said. So we, through with Patty Brennan, who's now a professor at Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts, we discovered, in a nutshell, that freedom of choice matters to animals. That sexual autonomy is not just a political concept, but an evolved feature of the social sexual lives of animals. And what I mean by that is that the feminist analysis of sexual coercion and sexual violence and conflict in human context actually produces predictive understanding of the natural world. And in The Evolution of Beauty, I described that as a feminist discovery in science. Now, after writing the book, I didn't get a lot of pushback on that sentence, but I realized, you know, where do I get off saying that? Right? And I had this sort of gut feeling that this was supportable, but I knew that there was this field, feminist science studies, that actually working in this area, and I should read it. So I started asking people, what should I be reading? And people said, well, you should be reading this and that, and you should be reading Judith Butler, and ultimately Karen Barad. And of course, I found that experience at first really challenging, right? Because a lot of these people are very pissed off. And often with science as the focus, right? But actually, I kind of agree with that, because sometimes I'm kind of pissed the way science goes, and I'd love to change it up too, right? So we share that. But in some cases, they included other skepticism about the mission of science. And in that case, I felt like, wow, you know, in reading this literature from queer and feminist critiques of science, I wasn't seeing engagement and pushback from science, trying to keep science because obviously we're going to need science to do this correctly. And so I saw an opportunity. And then ultimately I found some challenging ideas that were very different. And then at some point I realized, wow, I'm starting to understand them and apply them and think about them in new ways. And that's when I engaged in this project. At first I thought that I would just create a vocabulary or establish a vocabulary for a common conversation between science and humanities or science and cultural studies. But then I realized that I'd come to a point where queer theory had changed the way I thought about my life's work, about biology in a fundamental way. And then that's when I realized this is not just an article, this is not just a symposium, this is a book. And that supporting that idea was going to be part of my my goals. Now, of course, this work led directly to an engagement between science and politics. I won't return to that except to say that, I'm obviously arguing that scientists ought to be engaged with the political world. That the idea, which was certainly very popular in my training and in certainly in recent decades, that science should exist somehow outside of the culture as an independent and authority and speaking maybe even from the ivory tower toward the culture in an objective fashion. So I'm really eager to abandon that. And for those who may still be interested or in that kind of division, I'd say, how's that working for you? Right? And I think, in fact, science has never been under greater attack from all corners. And so I think that model for how science ought to engage is. Now, another real important motivation of the book was to realize through my knowledge of the culture, my own children now in their late 70s, or late 30s, or late 20s to early 30s, blah, blah. And so my own kids, and then students at Yale, and students that I knew, other people's families, the world is changing rapidly in how it regards the topic of gender sex. And that this is happening in rapid time relative to how science is responding. And so I fear that the gap between people's lived experience of sex and gender and what science continues in its kind of plodding way to say leads to a dangerous disconnection. So part of this book is aimed at minding that gap, minding the gap. Because in the gap between people's lived experience and science lies all sorts of rejection of science, whether it's vaccine denial, evolution, climate change, etc. Right? And that's not good for anyone. So this is about trying to connect science back to people's lived experience. Now, at first, originally, I wanted to write a short book. Right? I imagined a slim manifesto, right? And actually, I really thought, well, what's the shortest book you can write? And people said, oh, short books sell really well. That's good. Short books are good. People don't have enough time to read anymore, so that's good. And actually, I had this vision almost immediately. And that was a book so slim that you could steal it by slipping it in your back pocket. Sorry, apologies to the bookstore. But you could steal this book, right? And slip it in your back pocket. Maybe off the coffee table in a common room, some other room in your dorm. Because maybe you didn't want everybody to know that you might be interested in the topic, right? But I found out that, should I join audio? Yes, I've joined the audio. I found out that you can't speak or write rapidly or quickly about it's cool. Oh, whoops, no, sorry. I shouldn't have hit that. Okay. So it's very hard to write about these topics without a lot of background, without a lot of caveats, without bringing more people into the conversation. So it ended up not being a short book. I still have this book kind of in my head as a model. So how to dive in? Well, even since writing the book, I continue to have more thoughts about ways into the topic. And the book, I really start with culture and queer theory to get into the science, but I'm going to do it the opposite way now. And one is by starting with the idea of the genome as a blueprint. And this is something that has become pervasive, almost ubiquitous in our language of describing genetics. It was first coined by George Gamow in the 1950s, and this is literally just after the description of DNA and prior to people understanding even the most fundamental things about how it could encode anything, right? And Gamma was actually thinking about trying to figure out how the DNA encoded information about proteins. And he wrote, comparing a living cell with a factory, we can consider its nucleus as the manager's office and the chromosomes as the filing cabinets where all the production plans and blueprints are stored. So this is the origin. Now, just a few months ago, or back in May, the Washington Post ran a news story on the new pan-genome, which was a new genome, new version of the human genome that took into account diversity at 250 individuals at an extremely specific scale. And that story used the genomic, or used the blueprint word 8 times. So for nearly 70 years, this has been ubiquitous, right? And I would describe this as a linguistic hypothesis about the genome, right? In which the body is a material representation of information, of a plan, an evolved plan inherent in the molecules of the genome. Now, let's examine this linguistic analogy a little broader. We can say first that genetics is loaded with these terms. We talk about a genetic code, about transcription, translation, messenger RNA, gene editing. All of these are linguistic terms applied to molecules, right, or molecular actions, right? And I think the blueprint is just another one of those. Well, if we go to philosophy of language, where people have been examining what those kinds of words really are about, we can refer back to one famous guy in humanities, a guy named J.L. Austin, who in the 60s began to describe what he described as representational versus performative speech acts. And a representational speech is like the Furman pen is purple, right? That's an effort in language to describe some aspect of the material world, right? But then there are also other kinds of statements, like, I bet you the Sox are gonna win tonight. Good bet, but, or I sentence you to a month in prison. These are not descriptions of the world. These are actions in the world, speech that performs an action. And that is the origin of the word performative. Performative means an expression or a communication that is itself an action, right? And it's come in the literature, and it's now become common. It seems to be a word that people enjoy using, but in the performative meaning kind of faux, sincere, fakery, or for show, or insincere, right? But by the title "Performance All the Way Down," that obviously means if your performance all the way down, there's nothing you really are but performance, right? This is real; it's all this, and so that concept of performative is eliminated, right? So the idea that language was performative had a profound impact on the humanities in the 60s and 70s, giving rise to lots and lots of issues of deconstruction and post-structuralism and all sorts of interesting theories that if the text can actually, if language can change the world, can act in the world, then the book isn't just dry and dead on the shelf. It actually has potential. And that led to a real revolution in humanities. And what I'm arguing for is a parallel, performative, metaphoric revolution in biology. That the same idea has the same capacity, the idea of gene expression as a doing, as an action, not as a representation of a blueprint, but as a becoming, as an action in the world. That's basically the core science idea of the whole thing. So no field had a great, and performativity had no greater impact than the field of feminist and gender studies. And that's really through the work of, initially of Judith Butler, who proposed in the early 90s, late 1980s, proposed that gender performativity as an iterative enactment of cultural norms. That is, that gender was both was performative in two senses, both as a dramatic action, a series of actions realized within a social environment with other agents, and as a communication that is a doing. So in the traditional idea of performance, like a play, a kind of somewhat prescribed role realized in the world, and as communicative in the sense of Austin. And so, and this in particular is important. Of Butler's theory was of performativity was a counter response or rejection of the broader and earlier concept of gender as a cultural construction, being made up by the culture. So what this meant is that people bring something to this process of becoming gender. And of course, this is a big topic. I won't go further into it. But another author that was really essential to me was a feminist science philosopher, physicist, Karen Barad at UC Santa Cruz. But I want to have a chance to, her work was fantastic and really interesting, but I want to have a chance to talk about it today. So in getting to biology, I want to talk about some features of performativity in gender and sexuality that might be, that I think are really relevant. And this is my thumbnail sketch of performativity, which is entire literature, a classic idea, now kind of old, but still read universally in these kind of programs. The first is the idea of discourse. Discourse is kind of structured communication. And sadly, in communication in science and in biology, has mostly become reduced to information transfer. But that you can't say, I hate your data. Right? That subjectivity is removed from this concept of communication that has been cybernetics and that has become so influential in science, right? And the people who started this back in the 50s, they understood that they were just talking about this one component of communication, but later on people have forgotten that. So, but discourse is about structured communication. Who's allowed to speak, who is permitted, who is a reader, how do those communities break up or lead to identities or boundaries, etc. Right? Discourse as kind of structured, restricted communication. Another, of course, is that performativity implies agency. Agency is the capacity for somebody to make their own decisions or to bring something to the process. Some people in the history of it, the phenomenon of gender are completely at home with what is being offered by the culture and feel no friction at all. And others bring to the process something else and feel friction, but maybe don't have the capacity to realize a different gender or gendered presentation. And others, of course, have that agency and act on it. Right? So we bring something to it, and that part of it is here. But it's also a freedom of choice, not complete freedom. You're still in an environment where you're interacting with others, but still some. And then this concept, rather obscure, of citationality, the idea of the relation between one gender performance realized at one point, iteratively realized, and something else, right? And this comes from the idea of in authors citing one another, and maybe not even with citations as in footnotes, but using the language of, adopting the language, and how that passes through the literature, right? But in biology, we'll see that now, as we'll see, anti-essentialism is also involved. The idea that if language is a performance in the world, or can perform in the world, then there's no essence that can be true prior to that language, right? That's this really big comment. And constraint and innovation, performativity is both an account of how gender can be limited and how gender expectations can change. So it's both a story about the history of oppression of gender minorities, and also an account of how those expectations and processes can innovate, giving rise to a different world, right? And then power. Foucault, one philosopher leaned on heavily in this literature, implied that power is not just the man dictating stuff down from on high, but it's really about the way in which, just within a social network, different individuals within that network actually work to monitor and regulate themselves, right? That power is about, is distributed. Right? But one of the quotes that really got me going in reading Butler was the following. And this is like, I don't know, Like, you think you get assigned to stuff. I didn't understand that at all for Tuesday for class, right? This is, I'm like in my 8th reading of some of these chapters, right? Getting more out of it, going back, reading other stuff, going back. And I finally understand the sense where Butler writes, performity is the reiterative power of discourse to produce the phenomenon that it regulates and constrains. And I suddenly realized, there isn't, I think, anywhere in genetics a better generalized description of what gene regulation is about than this one. And yet it's actually written entirely within the context of culture, right? It's like gene regulation is about the iterative, over and over again in different cells or different bodies, power of regulatory control to produce the phenomenon that regulation constraints. How does a system regulate itself and get off the ground, right? And over again. And so that led to some real consideration. Okay. So I now want to bring this to the biological world. And this is the kind of like brain-busting slide that biologists love. And, okay, and my experiment is over here, and all this kind of stuff. But I don't want to show a lot of details except to try to talk about how the properties of discourse and agency. We won't get to citationality, or let's start with discourse and agency in this image. So what is this? This is a cartoon of 3 cells. One cell here, a second one here, and a third one here. And we've got little cartoons of molecules. These are mostly proteins that the cell has actually transcribed and then translated into proteins. And this is about how cells grow up, how you become. And so as you're growing up, you can decide either to listen to your parents or listen to your friends, right? And in biology, cells listen to their friends, that is other cells. They don't listen to their parents. In C. elegans, they do that, but you developmental biologists out there have already heard about the difference between C. elegans or Drosophila, right? Anyway, so what's going on? This molecule here is releasing a protein called Wnt. And Wnt floats around in the cell, in the area between, and it binds to frizzled, but only on cells where frizzled is actually expressed. Frizzled is a Wnt receptor, right? And when frizzled binds Wnt, a whole series of things can happen, right? And we're going to ignore all of them, except to say that there's a big cascade. This molecule changes or binds or does not to this one, or cleaves this, blah, blah, leading to some downstream event, right? And what are those events? Well, in this case, beta-catenin being transported into the nucleus, where it binds to a bunch of other things, and then binds to a particular site, co-evolved expression regulation site, and leads to either the suppression or expression of a gene, the creation of a new protein, right? And so this is the result of literally probably over 1,000 papers required, studies, funded by the NSF and NIH to produce this diagram, right? And there's not only one, it's not just frizzled, it's all these others. So what's really going on here? What's going on here is cells are communicating molecularly. And the real fundamental challenge is, how does your body, which includes trillions of cells, develop all of these different organs functioning in an integrated way over time, right? Using the same identical genome, right? Well, the answer is some cells turn on certain genes and other cells do others. And how do they do that? They talk to each other. They crowdsource and they say, I don't know, what do you want to do? I don't got no liver. Okay, I know, I'm more like a gallbladder. Right? So, sorry. And then those series of cells actually become different, right? Those are discourse. Now, where does agency come in? Well, agency comes in. Notice that nobody has to listen to Wnt, right? This cell has to say, you know what? I'm interested in what my neighbors have to say in the Wnt channel. So it's making frizzle. This cell is not making frizzle. So this cell does not hear the message. This is discourse. Who is in the audience? Who is party to this conversation? Who is not, right? And if you write a book called Performance All the Way Down, you have to go all the way down. You can't just say, well, yeah, so here's one example. So the book includes lots of this kind of molecular detail, but mostly because I wanted to show, I think, what I hope, to future queer theorists interested in molecular biology for its own sake, that you could go to all these connections, right, and build this kind of argument. Citationality, I'll just sketch out. So for sort of homology, anti-essentials, let's go there. So in another great queer theorist, Eve Sedgwick, wrote in Touch and Feeling, performativity is anti-essentialist. What I mean by that is, once we recognize the power of discourse, whether it is verbal, gestural, pectoral, or molecular, to make and to affect reality, realize that discourses do not and cannot represent any prior individual essence. If the cell's action is a doing that creates the body and its diversities, then there isn't anything essential in that basically undermines all biological essentialism, right? And that's why. Power, just for those of you interested, I connect in the book Foucauldian distribution of power to the well-regulated body and to cancer, which is kind of rebellion which Foucault described as using the same language of power, but at a different independent loci, right? So there's all sorts of cool connections. So of course, I could have written this book about feathers, I could have written about flowers, but I just thought that genitalia were a lot more central to the topic. And so I restricted myself to talking as efficiently as I could to the topic of gender and sex. And the book includes both a description of canonical sexual development and differences in sexual development that occur mostly in mammals and primarily in humans. And I can't repeat all that literature. But I do want to say that the more you go into it, you find out that sexual development is becoming through discourse, that the organism is using its genome to reach its ends, not a kind of product of some algorithm or prior blueprint that enacts or materially produces some essential truth. Now, this is a diagram from the book that I describe how a bipotent gonad, a gonad that develops around day 44 post-fertilization in mammals and in humans, that has the capacity to become either an ovary or a testis. And through interaction with a series of gene expressions, ultimately ends up as a functioning ovary or a functioning testis, right? And these are all descriptions of genes. Now, interestingly, these genes are actually all these kinds of different functions. There's paracrine signals, there's hormones, there are receptors for the same, there are intermediate signaling molecules that are in the cytoplasm, there are actually what we call the transcription factors which travel into and bind at various sites. And actually, even after producing the diagram and publishing the book, I realized, but there's no cells. The cellular agents are not here. Some of these are within a cell, some of these are among cells, right? So even this diagram is nowhere near as complicated as it need to be. But anyway, there's a whole lot of players. I want to point out one thing. I'm going to focus in a few slides on SRY, sex related region on the Y, and sex determining region on the Y, and then also note that one of the jobs, these are the flat-ended arrows are repression, right? And the arrows are suppression, sorry, and these are activation. And so in this case, you see that one of the jobs of SRY and testis function is to actually to block beta-catenin, which is critical to ovary production. And one of the jobs of beta-catenin is to block SOX9, which is critical or functions importantly in the development of testes. So these two outcomes are preventing each other from occurring in different ways. Now, SRY is a really fascinating gene. It's been studied like hundreds and hundreds of papers, and most of them describe it as the master switch of mammalian sexual development. Right? and the master switch meaning that it is the one that does all the determines the outcome, right? And then in that view, this ovary XX development is basically a default, right? So this is active, this is decisive, this is controlling, determines it, and all this over here is just stuff happening, right? Of course, we now know that this is absolutely not true, obviously, since the role of some of these genes is actually to prevent these things. This is an active. And of course, I teach introductory biology at Yale, and right before they get me in ecology and evolutionary biology, they get developmental biology, where they're taught SRY is a master switch, and et cetera. And I like go right at it and give them another view. So, what is SRY? Well, here's some more detail here. We see SRY is not the master of anything. It's super problematic. It's got all sorts of problems. It doesn't work very well. One of the reasons it doesn't work very well is it's on the Y chromosome. The Y chromosome can't recombine, right? No crossing over, right? And one of the reasons, and that means you can't get rid of deleterious mutations, but everything that happens that's bad to SRY has to be compensated with some other thing. So everything's saving SRY from going bad, right? And that's what all these tests, so all these kinds of tests. And what we know is that all of these things also subject to other variation. Biological signals in this discourse only realize any action through other molecules that they co-evolve with. And if any of those change, the system fails. And so as a result, we can find that this leads to the single most common genetic reason why people, humans develop sexual, ambiguously sexual outcomes, that is, they're not reproductive or not as expected, are mutations in SRY and the genes associated with it. So it's occurring commonly. And it gives rise to real variation among real people. Now, another approach to this is to say that sexual development, it not only, I focus a lot on people, but I do some comparative stuff. So here we have some very odd species, or some of them, like the zebra, just like us. Females are typically XX, males are typically XY, right? But in birds down here, we see birds are the opposite. Males are typically ZZ, and females are ZW. So females have distinct chromosomes. In crocodiles, it's temperature dependent, right? And in honeybees, the female offspring are the result of fertilization, and an unfertilized egg develops into a male or drone, what we call haplodiploid. In many insects, including Drosophila, there are diseases, a disease called Wolbachia, where the disease is transferred from the mother to the offspring and in the egg. And as a result, the disease has no way to propagate itself with male offspring. So this actually goes in and manipulates the development of male offspring and makes them females. Or will actually create males that when they mate with a female that has Wolbachia, they fertilize the egg. And if they mate with a female that doesn't have Wolbachia, they kill the egg, right? So so sex can be the result of a disease infection state. And then here, this is the green spoonworm, baby green spoonworms in the ocean. They swim off and they're tiny larvae and they're smelling around. If they don't smell anybody of their own species for 21 days, they settle down into the mud and they develop as females. But if they smell any other green spoonworm in those first 21 days, they enter the body, they migrate down to the gonad, and they become male, but they're microscopic. They become an organ within the female body. But there is no genetic difference between male and female spoonworms, right? You can have this massive difference, and it's all the result of social environment. So here, the sex of green spoonworms is entirely determined by their social environment. And this has actually been known for 100 years or so. Closer to home, within birds, we can see, or within vertebrates, we can see, that, for example, all of these organisms have penises, right? This is a zebra, a duck, which is among the birds that have them, right? The gharial, or crocodilian, snake, echidna, related. So they all have, and it turns out that this one has XY, this is ZZ has a distinct chromosome, lacks a distinct chromosome, temperature dependent, like ducks, and this one here has a whole set of chromosomes that are independent from X and Y, but work like X and Y. And yet they all have penises. So you could say, what could possibly be essential about having a Y chromosome associated with a penis? They could alternatively be determined by not having a distinct chromosome, by temperature, or by, and the answer is nothing, right? In addition, the female monotremes, like mammals, they have mammary glands. But the mammary glands are older than the X chromosome. So there's nothing essential about an X chromosome or having two of them are associated with, lactation, because that is a newest way to actually create the capacity to lactate, right? So we can see even comparatively, there's excellent evidence undermining binary. So in finishing, I want to just say, how do we accommodate this and the what I call the binary bottleneck? I'm saying that individual sex is a becoming, that there's no sexual essence to the zygote, the body, or other than its becoming. But in fact, individuals, humans, are the product of sperm and egg gestated in a human womb. And if we take it even further back, just sperm and egg, that goes hundreds of millions of years back. Right? Only specific bodies in mammals and in other vertebrates can afford these reproductive capacities. And this mode of reproduction has persisted in our evolutionary shift for, as I said, 100 years ago. So, in one way of saying it, and the biologist would say that that's a whole lot of binary, right? But the ubiquity of the binary origin of individual lives cannot in and of itself create or dictate an essential fact of sex in a genome, an individual zygote, or an embryo. What I'm implying here is that sex is a fact about history. Sex is a history. It is not a fact about individuals. And that, I hope, is a new way to accommodate what I think is this, increasingly. So Butler asks, is there a way to link the question of the material body to the performativity of gender? And I think, yes, she asked the question, and taking performative here really makes that happen. I'll skip that one. Here are some conclusions quickly. We are performance all the way down. The performative continues gender all the way down to gene expression. Biology needs queer theory to get the phenotype right. This kind of performative biology occupies a queer intellectual space between Barad, Butler, Conrad Waddington, Alan Turing, Ruslan Vollard, others that you may have heard, and that science have a lot to learn from people who are not scientists. There is no individual sexual binary. Sex is not essential, an essential fact about the genome, blah, blah, blah. Sex is becoming. If individual sex is becoming, there is no essential nature to be either abandoned or adopted through trans experience. Likewise, there is no essential nature to be defended through cis experience. Trans experience is a more complex becoming and not different than self. And I think there are lots of biological examples. Now, in closing, what I want to say is I'm really hoping and aspiring to create a queer space in the core of biology. What do I mean by that? I mean, well, I'll say it more personally. I started watching birds when I was 10. I've never considered doing anything else. What does that mean? That means every aspect of my work is connected to me, who I am. I get up in the morning and, I'm an ornithologist, and I was, and I still am, right? And that kind of connection between me and my work is the source of not only great joy, real connection, and dedication, right? It's working for me, right? And I so appreciate that. That's a gift. But not everybody has that experience. And what I would love to happen is for a new generation of queer kids and their allies to live in biology the experience I have had of seeing their own life work lead to a productive career in the discipline, right? That should be broader. And that is what I mean by a queer space in biology. Now, over time, the queer is a positionality. It's not a defined thing. It's It's a comparison to the norm, the expectation. And one of the things is that once we start thinking about this, then science will cease to be queer. It will just be good science. And that's where I really hope to head. So I've gone over long, but I'm really appreciating your audience and your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And if you don't have questions today, pizza with Prum tomorrow at noon in whatever room that was. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that provocative talk, giving us lots to think about. So do we have any questions? I know there's a lot there at the end that might have blown your mind. So just raise your hand if you have a question or a comment, and I will bring you the microphone. We have a brave soul working with us.
Oh, come on. Please.
Hey, so I was just wondering if you've made any connections with your students, any queer students you may have that have like taken an interest in this kind of perspective and have anything like personal to add to it that's like kind of informed your understanding of this topic.
Yeah, well, I've had some really great conversations, interactions with folks in the history of science and the history of medicine program at Yale, and philosophy of science as well. And they really encouraged me. And I remember both Debbie Cohn and Joanna Radin, who are doing all sorts of cool stuff in history of biology, history of geography, weather now. Basically said in the fall of 2019, like almost the same week, told me, you know, I think you should be reading Karen Barad. Basically like the same sentence. I'm like, oh, who? And somebody who became just totally fundamental to the book, right? It really was. You know, one of the things that I think I bring to this that I didn't see represented in queer theory yet was a desire to get in under the hood and fix the science. A lot of people saw that my defined role is as an analyst of this discipline, not a participant. And that means, you know, problem, I stop there. It's like, well, what's the solution? How do we talk about 500 million years of sperm and egg and meanwhile deny the individual binary? And I think that's a challenge, that's a problem, and we gotta come up with a description of, and on the face of the solution, and one that people I hope will listen to. So that's what I saw the opportunity. And I didn't see anybody else. People said, didn't you have any collaborators? And I was like, I don't know, you know, it was COVID, we were all isolated in our houses, right? But I don't know if anybody was crazy enough to participate in that. But like I say, I am recruiting. So you too can think like this. Yeah, back in the
Do you see this having any effect?
Sorry, louder, please. I'm really quite hard of hearing.
Do you see this having any effect on like the field of intersex studies and people's gender expression through that?
Sure. You know, the term sexual difference right here in the title of the book, right? Genes, development, and sexual difference refers to the idea of looking at variation in reproductive anatomy in the absence of category, right? And I think in the book I have a lot of analysis of a whole chapter on differences in sexual development, which include many of the syndromes or situations where people would be described as intersex. Though individually I don't use that term because I think it already is, and somehow referring to and inferring the binary that intersex is something about a co-presence, right? But of two things that are somehow distinct, as opposed to an intermediacy or even just, you know, people that have no gonads at all, right? Or other kinds of variations that don't map to that. So, but I think it's really powerful. And one of the things it says is that if we are each a becoming, then intersex conditions, differences in sexual development, are not pathologies. They are just becomings. And that's a really, really important idea, because there are a whole biomedical industry around medically intervening in infancy with people that are born with ambiguous or non-canonical bodies, right? And these people do not get the chance to grow up to decide how they want to use their genitals, what genitals are for, or what. And I think that's really, I would think that's really a shame. And so the intersex term has become an important political and socially organizing. Now, this is not rare. There are some conditions that occur, like the differences in sexual health, like the lack of descent of one of the two testes, which are, or hypospadias, which is a change in position or variation in position of the urethra and the penis, which occur at rates like 1 in 50 to 1 in 200 male births. And there are other major differences that are occurring at 1 in 2,000. I think there was, some people say some of these intersex conditions are near about the same frequency as red hair among humans. And what that means is that not only is it the notion that somebody in the room or that somebody in the room knows somebody who's intersex is certainty, right? And so these are not rare, and yet parents receive, the culture provides parents with no kinds of guidance for what this is about, and that part of the mission of the book is to try to make the world safer for differences in sexual development.
Do we have one final question? We just have a couple of minutes left. Oh.
It can be loud.
Yeah, great.
So you said that you didn't have any pushback on like your original book about beauty, but have you seen any sort of pushback with this? Because I can imagine among scientists, like this kind of theory would be easy. You're an ornithologist, like in application to birds or alligators or cats, but not humans.
Well, first of all, I got a whole ton of pushback on my last book. I don't even know why that. People hated on it. It's really well written, but oh God, and they made it. I mean, the aesthetic angle actually was very productive, but the null model and some things I think just have gone almost nowhere, and that's a shame. This is a new book. I think it's not a popular book. Yeah, I mean, it's with an academic press, so it's a lot more gnarly than that. It's not, and so it's going to be slower. But I think what I described when I talked to the class today, people, what response are you getting? And I said crickets. Mostly like silence so far. Or a friend will say, "Wow, you're really brave, Rick, to wade in on that stuff." And I'm like, "Well, have you read it? Jump in. The water's great." I don't know. But so I think people are just wary of it. What I was saying earlier, I think soon many of these observations, the idea of gene expression as performative, is so obvious that it will become like, of course, and then people say, "Oh, we always knew that." That'll be the next move. Oh, we always understood that. But we're still just doing these experiments in this and that way. But obviously, one of the reasons I'm here, and one of the reasons I responded to Kathleen's invitation to come to Furman was, I'm eager to get this on the road and to have this discussion happen. So we'll see where that ends. But for any of you who were interested, I have a short essay translation, 4,000 words. It's at aeon.co, aeon.co. And you can get the gist of it briefly there.
We also have a copy, an e-copy of Dr. Prum's book in the library. You can download individual chapters too. Thank you so much. Please thank our speakers. I have a couple of just really quick announcements. I can just give over to your PowerPoint. So, as I mentioned, this was our 4th event in our year-long series. We have 3 more coming up this semester. We have Dr. Taryn Myers coming to talk about body image. We have a historian coming to talk about women going on hunger strikes, using their bodies as political tools. And we also have a transgender poet who's going to be doing some readings from her newest chapbook called Grief Slut. So very interdisciplinary here. So keep those in mind. We also have something, this is for tomorrow, but we have something coming up on February 20th. It's kind of unique. So if you're familiar with our queer zine archive, we have over 800 queer zines. We have one of the largest collections in the whole nation. And we have them in 5 different languages, from 5 different continents in a dozen different languages. We will be opening up the archive to the public, to all students, to all faculty, anyone who wants to come and giving a tour. The snacks are provided February 20th. So please do take advantage of that unique opportunity. And if you could just please fill out our survey on the way out. So we will be doing this speaker series for 2 more years, and we want to bring you the kind of programming that you're interested in. So please give us some feedback that can help us to make sure that we're providing the kind of programming that you want to see. So it's not always the case that biology and gender studies get together. So let us know what you thought of this. And thank you so much for coming, and hopefully see you tomorrow.